from ABC News Radio, KMET 1490 in Southern California. This is Biz Ninja Entrepreneur Radio with your host, Tyler Jorgensen.
Welcome out to Biz Ninja Entrepreneur Radio. I am your host, Tyler Jorgensen, and today we have the pleasure of talking with Mike McDermott, who is the founder of FreshBooks, a company you've probably heard of and possibly even gotten an invoice from. The funny thing that I enjoy whenever somebody comes on the show is just seeing how their business has impacted my life. And so I was going through my emails, Mike, and seeing how many people in my world have used your company to ask me for money. And it was a pretty good number. So that's actually pretty cool. But welcome out to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to go through your journey because it's a pretty good one, and it's always fun when the company is something that is, in the entrepreneurial space. Meaning, a lot of entrepreneurs use your company to help improve their business. When was the moment, Mike, that you first realized you were an entrepreneur?
Well, I think it's a question when I realized and when my mom realized, and those are different answers. She punchline is she was quicker to it than me. So when did I first realize? It's probably, I think I kind of got the bug, or I realized I like doing things, where I was sort of creating and driving things along, and actually building something. So the first one, I knew some of the things I liked. Like in high school, I used to organize these like trips for my friend with like buses and whatever. And I would take that on. And who does that? But I loved it, but I didn't know that was kind of the start of something.
Right.
And then in undergrad, I actually left the business school program and finished with like a BA in English, fourth year. But I started two businesses that year.
Oh, nice.
I think that's when it started to become real. I don't know that I'd even figured out at that point that was like a thing I could do for the rest of my life. But I think that's probably the closest.
So I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, unless you were introduced to entrepreneurship as a valid career path, you just start realizing that you're not fitting into the normal mold because you're enjoying solving problems differently than perhaps like your peers. And it sounds like that was similar to your journey. Like, I'm going to go a different contrarian path, but that's just because you're going to follow your passion or follow your ideas.
That's right. I have a neighbor, she's almost 100, and she talks about, Mike, you knew all the things you didn't want to do. I was like, no. But I didn't know what a yes looked like. And anyways, this is it.
Well, that's cool. And so you did a lot of businesses, you said, like in college, right? What were some of the first things that you did in the entrepreneurial space? And what were the early lessons that you learned?
So it's a good question. So here's an early lesson. Like one of the things I did was I ran basically a sporting event where like 600 people would come from all over North America, and I was responsible for feeding them and housing them and doing all this stuff. And I think I learned a couple things with the first year. I lost my shirt. It was really unprofitable. I ended up doing all this work and going into debt to do it. But I think I learned what a quality product is worth something, and I felt really good about that. And I was in the hole like $4,000, which as a student is, after all that work, it's not the end of the world. You get a long life ahead of you to figure it out. And I had to take a loan and pay that back and everything like this. But I think, putting that quality product on as a long-term thing and then sort of sticking with it. So I continued to run that event for over 7 years, and, I didn't lose money any other year. And I think that is something that has stuck with me throughout.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think, it's interesting when we look back because, now $4,000 probably doesn't seem like a lot in that process. But at the moment as a student, like that could have been that's the amount of debt or of a failure that could completely derail somebody and push them into a different path. And so I think it shows your tenacity and your resilience that for you just pushed through that. Reading through your journey a little bit is really fascinating because you've done some really fascinating things with FreshBooks. Now, it wasn't always FreshBooks. And when you guys decided to rebrand, you had a very interesting strategy. You talk a little bit about the importance of branding and how you guys went about that.
Yeah, so lots of stories baked into that. But punchline is we started out with a terrible company name, and we were basically, for all intents and purposes, building a consumer brand. And so you don't want to have your company name working against you. And so we had to go on a journey. Like we basically were very passionate about. I like basically I saved over an invoice, decided there had to be a better way to do it, built a piece of software. And in the process of building the company and the software, like we spent about 30 seconds on what we should call it. And that's how we wound up with the bad name. And then fast forward 2 years and it needs to change. And so, yeah, that took us on a journey of like, hey, what makes a good name? How do you go ahead and do that? And we spent a bunch of, a number of hours literally like combing through crossword puzzle books and trying to find, creative ways to capture what we did. And yeah, the punchline is there's two ways you can go about it. One's like an empty vessel. You take a word that means nothing, you build meaning into it. We went down the like combine a couple words path. I like it because I think a good name, tells people what category you're in, probably expresses your difference, is easy to remember, is easy to spell. Maybe it's even fun to say. And so, with FreshBooks, it's a fresh take on this kind of troublesome, mundane accounting thing. And books is, it's a nice consonant, punchy word, easy to remember, easy to spell. The combination worked well together. So that was a bit of our journey, and it served us really well. And people have been drawn to us, because then the name kicked off a whole opportunity to go and, maybe we think about the colors and how do we make this a friendly and inviting small business accounting software versus the alternatives. And it's helped us get to number 2 in America, which is probably why you're getting so many invoices from our customers.
Yeah. And I don't complain about it. Like they're invoicing me for good things, and it is an easy to use system. So you guys, one, I think there's a lesson to be learned of that. You didn't spend too much time on the name at the beginning. I've seen entrepreneurs get completely stuck in their business in launching something because of the name. Do you think that the way that you did it is smart, where you just focus on the product first, and then it's okay to come back and kind of rebrand later?
Yeah, I think that the big lesson when I was trying to remind myself is like, I like to like live the failure and then you survive on the other side. And like changing your name is something you can do. Right. So, yeah, if it had held us up in a major way, so you have trade-offs all the time, limited focus. I would have rather not had to rename, but I think we did it in a far more deliberative manner after the fact and knew more about building a business by then and what we were going to be. Like sometimes with a startup, like you don't know where it's going. Like, what is it going to be at scale? I didn't know necessarily what the right name would be if you think about it that way. And in fact, the name we came up with is derived from a very wrong-headed interpretation of where we would ultimately go. So yeah, I can see it both ways. But I think anything that's really stopping you from progressing early stage, in a like you're just creating friction for yourself. And right. What you need is escape velocity. So I would just move on to the next item.
Yeah, I think, momentum is so valuable in an early brand and in an early idea that anything that can kill momentum, like you've got to just be able to say, hey, this may be 80% or it may be passable for the next year. But if it keeps us moving, that there's a lot of value in that momentum.
Yeah. And the thing I would just do is marry that thought with, is it okay for now? And then, by the way, like put a moratorium on thinking about it. Because there's certain things where it's like you won't let go of it. And like you make that decision, the next week you're like, but the name. Like you got to say, for example, like we're not going to discuss this again for a year, at which time we can come back and change it. But don't, like, you got to put it to bed for a while or you'll never... it'll keep holding you back.
I like that. I've never heard that term of putting a moratorium on it or putting brackets or time restraints on certain decisions. So those things don't occupy more time than they deserve. How important is culture to FreshBooks and to new businesses?
Well, I think just in business, you can have two companies in the same category. One persists for a long time, continues to be a leader, reinvents new things. Another one kind of gets started and sort of dies before, anyone ever heard about it. The difference in many cases is not capital. It's not this, that. It's culture, right? It's the invisible thing. And, I sort of, my definition of culture is it's what happens when nobody's looking. So do you work in a place where somebody walks by a piece of garbage in the hallway, they pick it up? Or do you live in a place where they walk by? That's, the difference is culture. And so culture is a huge thing. And at FreshBooks, I caught the flame on this in a big way early days. And we really spent a lot of time being very deliberate around, how do we cultivate the culture we want? Like, first of all, I had to go with like, what is culture? I've never worked anywhere before, and it's a really squishy thing. And then how do you manage and perpetuate it? we've grown so much, and we're still growing so rapidly that people are always afraid, oh, we're going to lose it and all this stuff. And so it's something that needs to be tended to. But it is this thing. It's still the number one reason why people choose to work at our company. We're a top 10 place to work. Like, we compete against like the Googles and Amazons and great places to work stuff. And we've been a top 10 company for almost a decade, almost 10 years in a row. We've been doing it for 8. And that would be we had 1 year we went to 11. But anyways, that was, a black mark, or I shouldn't say a black mark, but, a blemish on the record. Anyhow, it's so valuable, right? Stuff just happens if you get the culture right for free. Yeah. There's things you don't need to do and train. And so it's just, if you can get it going, and it's not easy, and then keep it going, which is even harder. It's the X factor.
That's fascinating. I think you use such an amazing example that I'm trying not to take personally, of like, when do you work in a place where people step over the trash or pick it up? Because to me, that kind of stuff is so important, right? Like the person who is willing to, even if it's not their job, right, handle something, pick something up. I feel like that the trash example like spills into everything else in a business, right? Like, are they willing to pick something up or help someone or do something, even if it's not in their job title, right? So really, really powerful. Any tips for cultivating that side of things? Like, what do you guys do to actively cultivate culture?
So I think the really concise and hopefully not too high level answer is, I think you need to spend some time. It doesn't happen day one, but as you get going and you have a little water under your keel, figure out what your values are. And I would say, when I say figure it out, I mean, don't write them down and hope that's what they are. Like, look inside yourself, ask the team, ask your clients, ask the people outside the business, like, how would you describe us? And find those behaviors that they reference that are like, oh, this is how you folks behave, and write those down and be like, okay, this is our behavior. This is our little cocktail, and we'll write some values up around those. And then you use those to guide behaviors. Like, this is a reference point. This is what we expect. And you want to double down and shine a light on people when they behave in that way. And you want to pull somebody aside behind the scenes, one-on-one, very quickly, and have a very swift conversation if it's counter to. And maybe if it doesn't work out, help that person leave quickly. So that's kind of the Coles notes.
I think that's good. And I love the Coles notes for my Canadian friends and Cliff notes for the Americans. We've got a few Canadian team members on our team, so I know what that is. But it's just a fascinating cultural thing. So here, one of the things that I think is fascinating, you were an agency owner, you had a small team. You started building FreshBooks because you identified a problem as an agency owner. All of a sudden you're running this company that you just, you guys are one of the top 10 places to work. You're growing, you're huge. You're number 2 in your space in the US. That's a big difference from a 4-person agency, right? So as a leader, how did you face and handle imposter syndrome and growth as you had to evolve?
So I've often thought like our growth was kind of, governed and probably not in a good way, or maybe at times in a good way, but by my own growth and development. So I'd never worked anywhere else. Like, questions like, what is a CEO? Took me like years to figure out because I'd never seen one before. And like, what is vision? Like, I don't know. Let me go and try. Like, so it took a long time to figure that stuff out. And that's okay. But then I got a pretty deep understanding of each of these things because I kind of had to know. So I think the point is there, hey, you have to work on yourself. And you can imagine, like, people are like, well, what's the vision for the company? I'm like, I don't understand what vision is. Like, behind the scenes, I'm furiously trying to figure out what that is. Maybe we have like 15 people or 20 people or whatever, and you're trying to find some way to articulate it, to inspire people, get them to buy in. So I think, like, the first job is to go through all that. You really have to be working on yourself all the time. And then when you're doing that, it's, you'd be inhuman if you weren't doubting yourself along the way or wondering why you. But, I think anyone who's leading, so long as it's not old hat for them and they're still pushing themselves and challenging themselves, continues to experience imposter syndrome. It's like, hey, why me? Why should people follow me on this? I sort of haven't done this before. And I actually think a good way to reframe that is that's a really healthy thing. It means you're growing. that's what everyone you look up to is thinking all the time anyways, probably. They don't have the answers. They don't know. And just to get comfortable with it, accept it. It's part of growth. It's part of leading. It's part of living a life that's fulfilling. And, if that's the cost, then, embrace it.
It's the weirdest thing, growth in general, right? Because we recognize we want to become something that we're not currently, but we're not willing, or we have resistance to leaving what we are now. Right. So it's this weird paradox of like, if I want to be something I'm not, that means I have to abandon something I am, but there's pain in that disconnect. Right. And so that moment of like, am I going to be enough when I leave my comfort zone and go to this other place is terrifying.
I also think it's the uncertainty. And certainly when you're leading, it's like, I want to go to that place, but I don't know how. And for a lot of founders, like there's no role model. Right. There's nobody you can look to and be like, I know how they did it or what they look like. Like certainly for me, having never worked anywhere, it was, all first principles all the time. And,
right.
That's not easy. Right. And so I think, founders have, there's a range of perspectives on them and the behaviors and some of the stuff sometimes. But, I'll go ahead and say, hey, I think there's a lot of privilege in being a founder and there's a lot of challenge. Right. Because especially if you're like, doing it for the first time, never seen it before. Like that's, wouldn't wish that on an enemy in a lot of cases, right? It's just not easy to do.
It's true that there's a paradox of challenge and privilege, right? And I think that's true in whatever path we choose, right? That you're going to take the good with the bad, and it's about embracing the good and minimizing the bad as much as possible. Now, when you're in a founder role, especially in tech, the common, even though there's no role models, there's kind of a common formula right now. And one of the biggest things that a lot of tech businesses will do is go seek out venture capital or seek out cash. How did you choose to grow and handle the capital needs of growing a tech company?
Yeah. So I this is one of those things that I think has changed quite a bit. So, we've almost been at it, almost 2 decades, but not quite. And so when I started out, the whole venture industry was a very different thing than it is today. And especially, we were founded in Toronto, Canada, hence the Coles Notes, not the Cliff Notes.
Right.
And the venture community there, had a certain culture of feeling like big fish in small ponds. And a lot of the information you need to be an informed, founder or CEO in a venture-backed company was not evenly distributed. So the VCs would do this stuff all day, and the entrepreneurs would be, just hoping not to get, sort of in too much trouble, which is not a good negotiation approach. And even finding lawyers finding them who knew how to deal with this stuff was hard. And so anyway, we started out from a point of view of like, hey, I want to continue to focus on service and not just become about the dollars and cents. We want to focus on culture and not just become about dollars and cents, because, pretty soon you can get that dangerously close to activist investor. The answer is,
yes,
this number. And that was always my fear. I'll go ahead and say I think there's a lot of highly evolved financial investors out there, and I've had the good fortune to work with them, or a handful of them. But it's been a very good experience. But I came from a place of being, sort of afraid and uncertain, right, and not knowing. And so we started out with just raising money from friends and family, and over a decade before we brought on institutional capital, we've raised over $100 million since then. But it, it took us a while to understand. I think you have to understand your partners on the other side of a venture capital transaction. Like, what makes you tick? Like, how are you incented? And so I spent a lot of time taking calls because we had a lot of inbound interest in the company and trying to understand who do I like and how do those people behave, and basically just went to school as a student of venture capital until such time as, I had de-risked the product and the market and the team. And there's really nothing left but to get more capital to go ahead and scale the business.
So for you, a lot of it came down to just timing, right? Like not taking it on too early so that, like you said, de-risked and planned and had learned what vision is. So then you're not beholden to the answers coming from the wrong person. You get to maintain being kind of in the lead of it.
I think that is a part of it. And so, we could have maybe raised capital sooner or something like that. And so wanted to make sure, I think it's a little like Warren Buffett said, which is like, I don't buy things I don't understand. And so I think I knew I didn't know. And I had to get to a place where I knew enough. I still was like way behind, and it was still a big growth step and like a fearful, like, okay, here we go. But at the same time, I had a foundation to build on, and it wasn't just a completely mysterious thing. By the way, since then, all kinds of information on the internet. Like as an entrepreneur, you can go and read everything from how to negotiate a term sheet. By the way, there's standard terms now. Like it's just so different.
Massively.
And so I think you have to probably invest less, time and psychological cycles on that stuff than maybe somebody back in the day did. Yeah.
Well, and I'm just such a huge believer of learning from other people's paths and journeys. That's it. That's why this show started a decade ago, was honestly just out of my curiosity of learning from other entrepreneurs. And since then, we've interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs through their journeys and their cycles. And a lot of the common themes are exactly what you just said. Like, okay, I made the best decisions that I could at the information I had at the time, but now people have more information than I have, right, on that subject. And there's other subjects that are now completely unknown and we're trying to figure out. But if it's things that people have figured out before us, like success leaves clues, right? And failures leave clues too. What you guys, I mean, FreshBooks is not small, right? Over 24 million users. How do you maintain vision and ambition and all of these things, even though you've reached levels of success that very few companies will ever reach?
Well, I think part of it's culture, right? We have, for example, one value we call stretch, which is basically around continuous improvement and not settling. So we're leaders and we don't settle. We're constantly finding ways, creative solutions to go further. So I think it's kind of baked in on the one hand. And then, a couple other thoughts. One is there's always people who love to do the things you hate, which is like, so you surround yourself with people. And then there's always people who are almost like more, like now we're at a place where adding big company people is helpful. And we're a tiny company to work at for a lot of these people who join us. And so they're like, oh, this is exciting. Like you're not 1,000 people yet. Okay, I'm going to come in and that's great. And that's kind of fascinating to me. Because they're coming from a 40 or 80,000 person company in some cases.
Yeah.
In other cases, we still want to hire people from smaller companies too. So it's not just about that, but I think those are often the people that help you. Okay, I know the rigor, I know how this works at scale, and so those aren't the things they're thinking about.
Right.
And they can focus on other stuff and helping other people operate, at greater and greater scale all the time. So, maybe a long-winded way of saying every problem's a people problem, every solution's a people solution, and that's the path.
It's interesting. I'm really still like fascinated by the journey of the fact that you had a 4-person agency and now you have a quote unquote small, almost 1,000-person company, right? Like, and how to some people it's small. And this balance of perspective is so like remarkable of where, a 4-person company can be exhausting to run as a founder, but 1,000-person can too. And a 40,000, all of them require having good systems and good things in place. What have you learned what has been something that you have seen consistently from the point of view having a small team to a pretty large company at this point that have helped you as the CEO, as the founder to maintain balance?
I think for me, and this is going to be simple answer and maybe not specific enough, but it's really about who you bring in the door, right? The quality and the caliber of the people that you are hiring is really the leading indicator for what's going to happen next. And then you've got to conduct, right, which is to lead and help people understand which way to go and why. But the one thing is bringing the people in and helping them understand the customer. If you can do those two things, almost everything else is going to take care of itself.
It's funny. You've come back to that quite a few times, right? Like the caliber of people, the culture of people, the all of those things become such a major thing. What are some mistakes that you've made along the way, and how do you shout out to others to avoid them?
I made lots. Maybe I've made them all. One thing about me is I'm a little bit deliberative in my thinking, and some people kind of see that as slow. I see my job is to make a handful of decisions in a year, like 3 or 4. And so if I don't get to them right away, but they're good decisions and they're durable, then I think of that as success. But some folks might say, hey, go faster on that. I have a slightly different orientation. I'll like push all the other decisions to other people.
Yeah.
Well, you do it. And so that's been one of my things. And you can argue that's a failure, but you can also argue it builds a little more of a collaborative workplace, and it's just stylistically different. I'd help people with that. So, I think I've made a lot of, over the years, I've really had to work on how do I manage people. Like I probably didn't appreciate all the biases that I got sort of ingrained in me from my own family, and not a lot of positive feedback, and, kind of directive in, how to do stuff. And so I think I made a lot of, almost just like people management directional, mistakes over the years from some pretty hardwired stuff. And I think maybe this comes back to the individual journey, like trying to like overcome that and sort of meet people where they are and find the style that's right for them, I think is a big part of the journey. And then, and the byproduct of that, hopefully being they're super motivated to do whatever it is that they're doing. Like, I think and then they're giving you like 130%. Like that's hard to do. And I certainly have not achieved that 100% of the time. Probably even close, maybe a little more in later years, but it's that's so a lot of probably various mistakes along the way, in that realm.
I think it's interesting that you bring up like familial bias and just the fact that we enter into our entrepreneurial journey carrying baggage and perspectives from the past, right? And so no matter what our journey was to get to entrepreneurship, we carry that with us. And being willing to face it and look at, are these biases serving me or hindering me is really, really powerful. And a lot of what you've talked about throughout our interview is personal growth, right? Like that's been the most strongest recurring theme that you've brought up is personal growth. Are you into meditation? Are you into coaches? What are your secrets for personal growth?
Sort of all of the above, on again, off again. I'm these days, I go for almost an hour walk by myself in the morning, and it's mostly not to think. It's mostly to not think and get a good baseline of not thinking going for the day, right? And then just trusting, okay, if I'm in the right frame, all the answers come easily and quickly. And the reactions, those hardwired things that mostly don't manifest these days, but years ago, like that's if you can spend that time early in the day, you're less likely to be beholden to those.
Yeah,
but the reaction, the bias, you'll observe that better, that kind of thing. So I am a big fan of that. I also have used coaches. I've also long collected advisors and people who I could reach out to, and was not afraid to I would. I'd find people that I trusted who I know knew something I didn't know yet, and
right.
Would call them up and be like, I don't know what to do. And it's mostly that's a call that people are compelled to lean into. They're like, somebody's calling me and they're telling me they don't know what to do. How can I help? It's kind of the natural response. And I didn't, it wasn't a strategic thing, but it served me well over the years.
There's an old adage that it costs nothing to ask advice from a friend, right? And it's, I think it's from Richest Man in Babylon. And a lot of times, you mentioned that there's not a roadmap, or we don't have always like clear mentors, but with specific decisions, usually we can find someone, maybe not for the whole kit and caboodle, but for parts of it. So Mike, I'm a big believer that all of this hard work, all of this ambition, all of the challenges that we face as entrepreneurs is moot if we're not building the life that we dream of. What's one major item on your personal bucket list that you're going to accomplish in the next 12 months?
Well, after almost 20 years, I've passed the keys to the CEO chair to a gentleman who's kind of leading us through a global expansion. He's been with us for a couple of years. He's super well suited to the role, and I'm proud to partner with him. So we run the company together. But one of my big things is to actually try and not work so much. Spend a little more time with my family, and I'm trying to start that in July and August here as we tape this. Good. I don't know when this will air, but kind of summer in North America, 2021. Coming out of COVID, now double vaxxed, all that good stuff. So yeah, I think that will be a good start. You can kind of measure me against that in the next 3 months. If I spend a lot of time with my kids and my wife and family, that'll be a big win.
So let's pretend that Canada is fully open. That's easy to travel. You have a dream place you'd love to take the family?
The kids want to go to Mexico. That's their dream place, but they haven't been many other places. So that's a factor. My wife wants to go somewhere we know. I want to go somewhere new. So I think maybe I'm going to try and find a balance of a little travel when things open up, some places that are familiar and comfortable. And, I look forward to, going somewhere that I haven't been before.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming out on the show, Mike. Hope everyone checks out freshbooks.com. If you're not already using them for your bookkeeping, definitely check out freshbooks.com. And Mike, really appreciate you coming out. And to all my entrepreneurs and biz ninjas, wherever you are listening, it is your turn to go out and do something.
Thank you for listening to Biz Ninja Entrepreneur Radio with Tyler Jorgensen. Please make sure to subscribe so you're first to hear new interviews and episodes. If you found this podcast to be valuable, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to visit our online dojo at bizninja.com to claim your reward for listening to the show.